Good evening, everybody. I'm Patty Lombard, and I'm the co-publisher along with Liz Fuller of the Larchmont Buzz, and we're happy to be part of the group convening this. We've got about 80 people who signed up for tonight, so we're just going to give people a few more minutes till the magic 5 after, I think, is Zoom time. I can see some of you waving. This is great. If you want to turn your camera on, that would be great. We'd love to see you. We're also totally fine if you want to be in gallery mode. You can see other people by scrolling through. We've got about 42 people, so we might have another bunch start, but I think, what do my colleagues on the panel with me say? Heather, Gary, and John, shall we?
We got to do the 7:05, don't we?
Yeah, the first two meetings worked well.
1 minute, 1 minute.
One more minute of me gabbing. Okay.
It's done.
All right. I love that cake somebody put up as their picture. I think that's really great. It looks like it's Lynn Chen. I love that cake. That looks so cool. Great. All right. So we're getting there. 42 people. I hope everybody got the links okay, and you're getting the emails and everything. You're all here, so that's a good sign. We've also posted the recordings from the previous 2 sessions. You can find those links on either the Larchmont 2021 site or the Larchmont Buzz.
Addie, just let me know when you want me to.
I will.
Go into present mode.
Yeah,
Present
okay.
mode, not present mode.
Present.
Okay.
All right, well, I think at 7:05, we'll go into present mode. How about that?
Okay.
All right, so here we go. John's gonna turn on our present. There we go. I'm Patty Lombard.
Is it working?
It's nice to have you. Not one more click and I think we'll be there. There you go.
Okay.
Great. All right. So anyway, I'm Patty Lombard. Welcome to everybody. We have about, well, you can see in the participants column, we have about 45 people with us. We had about 80 signed up, so we're still going to probably be admitting people, but we'll go ahead and get started. I just want to introduce myself. I'm one of the conveners along with 3 other people. I'm here representing the Larchmont Boulevard Association, which is a group of community-minded business owners along the street. And I'm also the co-publisher along with Ms. Fuller of the Larchmont Buzz. And I'd now like to ask my colleagues to introduce themselves. Heather.
Hi, I'm Heather Boylston. I work with the Larchmont BID, which is the property owners. I've also lived in Larchmont for 20 some years, maybe 30 by now. I was a co-founder of Larchmont Charter School as well. So I bring that up just to tell you how invested I am in Larchmont. And I'm really happy that we have all of these groups working together. We have the business owners, the merchants, and the neighborhood associations, and all of the neighbors coming together to talk about what's best for Larchmont. I think this has been a great process, and I look forward to tonight to hearing more from everybody. Gary?
Oh, thanks. Hi, I'm Gary Gilbert. I've been a resident of Windsor Square for over 35 years. I lived on Windsor a while ago, and when it came time to downsize and move, I said to my wife, all I really care about is being able to walk to Larchmont. That was my one bucket list, so I'm thrilled to be a part of this. I'm excited that we get a chance to hear from the community, because I've been speaking to people for the last year about a lot of these topics, and now we can really hear from people. And we're excited that you're here, and we're thrilled that we have so many people coming. Normally neighborhood events get 1/3 this amount, so we're thrilled again. John Kaliski.
Great. Thank you, Gary and Heather and Patricia. The 4 of us have been talking for some time about this subject. I started talking to Patty Lombard about it probably 10 years ago, I feel like at this point. But I'm John Kaliski. I'm an architect and urban designer. I live just south of Wilshire Boulevard in Windsor Village. I'm also a member of the Country Club Park, Oxford Square, Wilshire Park, and Windsor Village HPOZ board. and come to Larchmont almost every day. And I'm really excited that we're going to hear finally, after several sessions, from a lot more people tonight, and I'm looking forward to the ideas. Our goals and objectives, what we're going to do tonight is we're going to talk about our general goals and objectives, meaning the four of us who organize these meetings. We're going to recap the two meetings very quickly that we've had, just so that we remind ourselves. And we're really lucky in that we're going to try to set the stage for the conversation by inviting two of the beloved local businesses and the owners of those businesses to tell us a little bit about their stories and why they really find Larchmont to be a wonderful place, but also some of the challenges and opportunities that they see. And we wanted to start with that because we've heard from a lot of people. Here comes Engine Company 26, or 29, excuse me. I apologize. Anyway, we've heard from a lot of people that supporting local businesses is so important, so we wanted to start there. There are four key areas that we've gleaned in the course of the first two sessions that we want to try to touch upon tonight. There may be more, we're looking forward to that, but we heard in those first four meetings that there were a lot of people who had ideas about supporting local business. We heard a lot of beginnings of ideas about how to improve the street, to make it a better place or to make it more functional. We heard a lot about flexibility and land use flexibility in particular. What types of regulations do we need in the future? What types of frameworks in terms of regulations should we support or not support? And then we also heard from some folks the importance of not forgetting about north of Beverly Boulevard, North Larchmont. All of those are important, and we want to make sure we touch upon those, but we are having a moderated discussion as we get into this, and all ideas are welcome, and we'll conclude with next steps. In terms of the meeting considerations, I would now say we're at the middle of the beginning of a process. We want to welcome and create input opportunities for all. We hope that you'll all listen well and speak well and respect your neighbors even when they have different opinions than yours. Civility is key to this conversation. We know that some folks don't like participating verbally in these types of conversations, maybe even more so when they're digital. So if you have comments that you want to get across but don't feel that this type of public forum is the place to do it, send them to Patty Lombard, patty@larchmontbuzz.com. We want to see all comments and try to do the best we can to honor all of them. If you're not familiar with Zoom, we just remind you that there is a chat button. We'd encourage you to press that because that's where you will see people asking to raise their hands and speak, which we'll do a little bit later on. Gary and Heather are going to be curating that conversation. If you're not participating in the conversation, please press mute so that things like Engine Company 29 don't disrupt the evening. Don't forget the chat box. You can follow a parallel conversation there. If you want to enter, you enter typically at the lower right-hand side, and have patience. It's not easy for Heather and for Gary to see all these comments all at once, but we'll do our best to get to as many of you as possible. So what are our goals and objectives? And I think those goals and objectives are for the four of us, maybe even more so than everyone else. We were interested in this process in exploring means, especially short-term means, to support existing and foster new neighborhood-oriented retail and enhance Larchmont Village. So we're open to everything tonight, short-term, mid-term, long-term, but just know that the four of us think the short-term was where we started, and we don't want to lose that focus. We want to collect ideas. We want to encourage neighborhood dialogue and input regarding a sustainable Larchmont Village and a sustainable future for the village. And we want to develop some next steps that hopefully there'll be a working consensus around for short-term ideas, but also we don't want to neglect the midterm and even the long term. We're hoping that this conversation will inspire more people to get involved at all sorts of different levels. Let me just make a quick recap of the two conversations we've had to date. The first is the June 28th retail trends conversation. We had two guests, Rob York, Andrew Thomas. Andrew runs the Westwood Bid. Rob York is a retail specialist. It was a very interesting conversation, an expansive conversation. Big ideas that were talked about. Well, one was that there's a lot to work with in Larchmont, and that we're fortunate because we're less vulnerable because of the demographics of the neighborhood than many streets that are similar to it. But notwithstanding that, rents are challenging. And while the rents are challenging, that doesn't necessarily mean that it precludes independents or mom and pops or local businesses. It just makes it more challenging for them as those rents go up. We also heard a lot about how retail has changed, especially in the post-COVID period. There's definitely long-term trends towards more food, beverage use, niche retailers. A lot of the traditional goods retailers that you saw on main streets have been replaced by internet businesses and are really challenged. I think both of our retail outsiders thought that the buildings, the storefronts, the sidewalks were not in as good a shape as they could be. They focused in on the corner uses, the sidewalks and the trees a little bit, but it just felt tired, they felt. Both of them emphasized the need to adapt for flexibility and nimbleness in relationship to the existing Q and D conditions. Those regulations have been around for at least 10 years. They go back 20 plus years, almost 30 years. And that sometimes our ability to legislate the regulations we want is less quick than the way that the marketplace changes, and that we needed to be prepared for that. In that regard, they said there should ideally be ways to encourage shorter leases for startups, foster pop-ups, think about making it easier to ride share to the village and support the alfresco dining. And of course, support the independents with maybe local campaigns, other things of that sort. I think both of them were very interested in this new LA restaurant beverage program, which tries to create a more systematic way of looking at alcohol uses in retail districts. That's something I'm sure we'll talk about tonight. And they said, focus on your local customers, focus on restaurant food uses, health, wellness, and fitness uses, because those are the uses of the current trends and of the future. In terms of placemaking, placemaking was presented by Howard Blackson, an urban designer from San Diego, Lindsay Wallace from Main Street America, who was introduced to us through John Wellborn. Thank you, John. Placemaking was really defined in that meeting as gathering to make Larchmont a people-first space, which meant that you not only had to make improvements, but you had to talk about how to make improvements in order to have placemaking. COVID was described as a people-centered pivot, that these new patterns of retail and of use of streets and sidewalks that happened during the COVID period are here to stay. We got to figure out how to make the most of them. We were encouraged to think about Larchmont as a mixed-use place and a shared street place with lots of different functions in the street, not just automobiles. There was a lot of talk about curbside management and what was called layered streets. In that regard, we were encouraged to think about different varieties of parklets, not just dining parklets, but gathering parklets and other types of uses of the street that had a wider definition of activity than just food. We were encouraged to design for time, not speed. And we were also really encouraged to think about the social impact of the street and recognize that it's through the gathering and the hyper-local events that occur on the street that ultimately real, authentic economic value is created. And in terms of economic impact, to try to think about ways that you could do things on the street that would increase foot and bicycle traffic, encourages businesses to collaborate, and then some very basic things like clean and safe parking, support the legacy businesses. I'm sure we'll talk about that. Doing a building and accessibility audit to make sure that that sidewalk and street is working, or sidewalks are working as well as possible, and to consider maybe new generations of design guidelines and best practices for making main streets. So those were all ideas that were thrown at us. But rather than start with those, we thought what we would do tonight is start with the two of the local businesses. There are others, some of which I know there are folks here tonight who will love to hear from. And just really start with Joanna Vernetti and Bert Deixler, both of whom run businesses that all of us are pretty familiar with, and sort of hear how they react to all of this, to find out from their perspective, not only maybe what some of the challenges were in terms of opening and or continuing to operate their businesses, but what they feel we might do to make the street better, to make the village better, and to make a better Larchmont. So with that, I'll turn it over to Joanna. I'll give you the first crack at this to tell us a little bit about yourself, what you've been trying to accomplish, some of your challenges, and how you react to some of these ideas and maybe some of the things you think we should think about.
Well, first, I'd love to introduce myself. I know there's a lot of people in the gallery that I know and many that I don't. My husband, Steve, and I own Vernetti. Our last name is Vernetti. We have lived in the neighborhood for coming up on 20 years. One of the reasons we wanted to live in this neighborhood is because of Larchmont. Like, it clearly was a wonderful villagey street where we wanted to raise a family. So we bought a house. We've had 3 children. They go to school locally. We have had the restaurant open for over 6 years now. And it's been a journey. And, you know, there's hard days and there's amazing days. And we love it. We love having a business in the neighborhood. Our son now works in the kitchen. Our daughters are a little young, but we're hoping that they work in the business one day. And you know, it's been incredibly rewarding to get to know everyone even more so, and to have the teachers from our kids' school come and eat at the restaurant, and to see our friends and neighbors come and eat at the restaurant. It's invaluable to us. You know, it was tricky getting it going, but we were cruising along. COVID was another tricky moment, and we were very fortunate to have a good relationship with our landlord that allowed us to get through the takeout only model, which is not a model that we were, ever expecting for Vernetti. And additionally, the outdoor dining has simply been a lifesaver for our business. There's no way we could have maintained our business with, just the tables that we had out prior to getting that alfresco dining. And so I would say, from our perspective as a business owner, one of the best things to support a restaurant is just flexibility from the city, because that outdoor dining happened so fast. It was like, here's the program, sign up, it's there for you. And I think also for some of the other restaurants on the street, from what I understand, it was pretty valuable as well. It has been pretty valuable. And I would say the other thing that from our perspective would be make a successful Larchmont moving forward is just to have more businesses in the empty spaces. We realize that obviously there's huge construction going on down the street, and hopefully that'll be done at some point and they'll fill up with businesses. But a street like Larchmont is an ecosystem, and we welcome, hopefully Great White's going to be coming in soon. But, restaurants bring customers for other restaurants. Restaurant customers turn into retail customers. Like, it's a delicate ecosystem, and we just think business brings business, and obviously makes it a more vibrant street that people can come, they can shop, they can eat, they can do all the things they need to do, and it's just a place to hang out.
Well, that's a great sort of introduction. I know that Bert, you're there somewhere. There you are. Bert Deixler is here as well, and you're the proprietor and owner of Chevalier's, which we really appreciate that you stepped in and kept that going. Perhaps you could tell us a little bit from your perspective what you've accomplished, what your challenges are, and sort of your reaction to the type of conversation that we're having, and the types of things that you think about would be helpful to support your ongoing business.
So first, let me say I appreciate the opportunity to speak to this august group. Particularly appreciate the opportunity to listen to Joanna's wise words. Much of what she says is consonant with the experience that we've had. Let me give you a 45-second overview, if you'll indulge me, about how we got started. In rest of life, I'm a lawyer, and I had the opportunity to work with a client, Daryl Holter, now my partner in the bookstore. And as one does, you ask, what are you interested in other than your business? He being an entrepreneur, me being a service provider. And we both hit upon the fact that we like to go to a local bookstore on Saturdays, buy a book and go next door to a coffee shop and spend some time reading the book and enjoying some peace and quiet. We quickly realized we both lived in the area, he in Hancock Park and I in Windsor Square. And we then hit upon the fact that the then extant bookstore was in extremis, to put it politely. And it was suggested, we can't reconstruct it exactly, that we look into whether the bookstore would be for sale. Speaking to a CEO as a service provider, I understood that I was instructed to go look into the details of the sale. I approached the then owner, the queen of Larchmont, and now 100-year-old Phyllis Winthrop. And we looked around, and it was pretty clear that I had more books on my nightstand than Phyllis had at that time in the store. And so I wondered, she was then 95 or so, how do you approach this question of acquiring a bookstore? And so I thought about it with care, and I said to her, Phyllis, what are your long-term plans for the store? I thought it was a gentle way into the topic, and she said if I could find somebody I like, I would sell it in a minute. And so I took the social risk of asking her what she thought of me. Happily, she said she liked me. She said she liked Daryl. And in relatively short order, we bought the store and quickly learned we had no lease, which we thought presented a challenge. We entered into a lease with the then landlord, the 100-year-old landlord, who in time sold it to this group, the Christina Group, which is developing the property. And after lots of assurances that they wanted Chevalier's, the oldest independent bookstore in Los Angeles, then 80 years old, to be the signature tenant, in late September, as time ground down, we were told that not only were we not going to be the signature tenant, we weren't going to be any tenant, and that we should leave December 31st. But if we would like, in 2 or 3 years, we would be welcome back. It didn't seem like a great business opportunity to us. And so we scrambled around. We found the new location. So one headline would be, if you can locate a local business next to a really popular, excellent pizza place, that's a good long-term strategy. What has motivated us throughout, because really who needs to be in money-losing businesses, was the sense that we kind of owed it to this community. Daryl and I have lived in this area with our families for 35 or more years. It really is, we've lived here by choice. Our friendships are here. And I was struck today by David Hewlin's piece in the LA Times, in which he argues that a benefit of what we've learned during the pandemic is the importance of keeping the city small. And so that's really what we're trying to do at a bookstore. It is for the community and of the community. We want to be responsive to the community. We try to put on these events to draw people to come to our events, to meet authors, local, national, etc. And we want to use the space more productively for local events, not necessarily for book events, but for political events, for social get-togethers. It's a comfortable space with the opportunity for us as neighbors to get together, to talk about things that matter to us, and will make this a better place for all of us to live. I echo Joanna's observation that business begets business. I would hope that we're going to observe across the street, not the Versace and Gucci stores that we were told by Larry Taylor were in his game plan for that space, but rather responsive local business, where possible owned by local owners, so that we have a sense of community and we're all in this together. And that's what we hope to do here. And so far, so good. My last observation is when it looked as though we were going to have to go out of business, and we posted a letter from the heart to our community, the enormous response from people saying, I'm with you. Let me buy a gift certificate. I really would love a Chevalier sweatshirt. Really was the difference between having another vacant space and having a business that is functioning next to Larchmont Pizza. So again, thank you for the opportunity to speak. And if there's some question or comment that's appropriate, I'd be happy to participate.
Well, thank you both very much. I think you've really set us up. Actually, Bert, you set us up absolutely perfectly, because I wanted to take a pause right now and in fact ask if there were any questions or comments that the folks who have gathered here tonight have for either of you, or about what we're doing in these meetings or our objectives or anything else, and then we'll dive into the 4 topic areas and gather more information. So I see there is at least one comment, Gary and Heather, but does anyone else want to ask a question at this point, or specifically ask Joanna and Bert anything?
I'd also just like to say that Joanna had another meeting. So if anybody has any Vernetti questions, at the top, now is the time to get her attention.
Before I disappear.
Yes.
Well, I do see one comment that says being a small mom and pop business shouldn't have to be an exercise in community service, but it is. It sounds like, Bert, you actually like being a community service in some ways.
Yeah, it's the whole reason to have a bookstore. As I like to say, I have many ways to lose money other than being in the bookstore business. So it's only about walking into the store and seeing people and getting authors. And now we're at the stage of development where authors are calling us and asking for the opportunity to present at the store and talk with our community. It's really an incredible positive life experience for me, for Daryl, and for our incredible, amazing, involved staff, people who really care about what you are reading and what you should be reading. I'm always reminded of our wonderful manager, Liz, who wouldn't allow you to let yourself down by taking some dreck to read when she knew you were capable of something way better. So we all learned a lot from her.
It looks like there's a message. Hand is up from John Wellborn. So I think John has a question.
Just a question for each, Joanna and Bert. I have followed the trials and tribulations of both of your commendable achievements of actually getting open on Larchmont, and I'm thankful for both institutions. This would be a question to probably anybody who's a tenant on this call of 655 people, but since Joanna has to go and you're both there. So what do you think about rents? Are the rents too low, too high, just right?
I wouldn't say too low. Ours is sustainable at the moment. Next time we come, I don't know what'll happen when our lease comes due. That's usually when the rubber hits the road of, we're able to sustain what we agreed to, and with the increases that have happened over the years. But, I know other rents I think are higher than ours, and I don't, rents are based on the market. So hopefully it's all going to stay that way. And like I said, our landlord has, in this COVID situation, worked with us. So they're not the big bad landlord, for sure.
Bert, do you have any thoughts on that one?
Well, we had no negotiating room at all. The landlord knew he had no negotiating room, and there's nothing quite like receiving a lease, sending back comments, and having your comments stricken in red, every single one of them. So, we made the business judgment, the emotional judgment that we were not going to be the folks who closed an 80-year-old bookstore. So, these are the lemons we were given. So we've made lemonade as best we could.
Hey, John, there's a question for you, John Wellborn. I don't know that the question is for you, but I thought you'd ask it because I know that over the years you have tried at various times to document what's actually going on in the street. And Karen Krieger has asked, how many landlords control Larchmont? Do you have any sense in a very approximate way about how many different landowners there are between First and Beverly?
Well, I think the landowner's representative can tell me if I'm right or wrong, but Heather, isn't the number either 24 or 25?
It's 24, and it's 25 if you count the city who owns the parking lot.
So that means that, we have.
They're about 75 tenant spaces, I think.
So that's important because that means we have somewhat fragmented ownership, which presents, say, an opportunity and a challenge, but it's a good question.
And I think a related factor is there are about 30 or 31 vacancies, but that includes pretty much Melrose to First Street.
And it also includes, does that include the 14 current vacancies at the?
It does.
Okay, so, we'll see what happens at the end of the year when they're ready to go, whether they, Joanna, bring in all those businesses that will beget more business or not. So maybe with that, what we ought to do is sort of go into the next portion of it. And again, I think both Joanna and Bert set us up for this because our first topic that we wanted to spend 10 to 15 minutes on was really if folks in our audience in particular had ideas about how to support local businesses. I think both Bert and Joanna made some suggestions along the way in that, but are there ideas or that you have, or do you want to ask questions about supporting local businesses that could somehow turn into short-term, mid-term, and long-term actions? So does anybody want to speak to that?
Can I say one thing? Because I know Joanna
Absolutely.
has to jump off, and we have a question from Sean Neefsey, who was asking about he's in favor of allowing restaurants to order mixed drinks. Does Joanna have any thoughts on restaurants being able to serve alcohol? And I know that's something that we've talked about in past meetings.
It would be amazing. Certainly everyone understands that restaurants, as many other businesses on the street, operate on very small margins, and full alcohol sales would certainly help with that. And, I will say we've had the restaurant for over 6 years, like I've said, and we've had wine and beer. It's not a party joint. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think that there are people who come to Larchmont are not coming to get drunk and get crazy. It is a very valuable element that I think would not only, ensure our future that, we like to be here for 32 years like the Greek, or, it would help us weather any crazy lease agreements that we might have to do in the future, but would help bring other restaurants. From what I understand, Great White is, and I think they're mostly a breakfast and lunch place, but they're interested in full alcohol because it quite frankly can be the difference between being open and not open. So
Joanna, I know you have to leave. There's a question about whether most of your diners are local or they come from far away. Do you have any?
No, I don't know exact percentages, and it's interesting. It goes up and down depending on the season and people are on holiday. But a lot of our diners are local. Way over 50% for sure. But we have people who come from the west side. We have people who come from the valley. It's a mixed bag. Sometimes people who are headed downtown, when there were shows happening downtown and things like that.
And Bert, do you keep any records of that as well? Can you tell who's walking in from local and who's traveling?
Not really, but it is our sense that we are mostly a local business with some number of tourist visitors, because apparently Larchmont is in some guidebooks internationally as like a typical American Main Street, which I think also might impel thoughts about what kind of businesses we'd want to have here. But mostly it's local people who come back who we know, and we can ask, how did you like this book? If you like that book, try this one. We're pretty happy with that.
Yeah, there's something else. I mean, as part of this committee, I've done a bunch of research, and Heather can now help me out here. What I learned was that some of the building owners, it's their only property, and it's a pretty important thing to. Others are owned by large corporations. Others bought it 50 years ago. Others bought it last week. So in terms of each landlord seems to be has to be treated separately. So Heather, can you just?
Yeah, I mean, it's just pretty much like you said. It's everybody has such a different circumstance with what they owe on the property, or there's some property owners, like you said, that have owned it for decades and it's a family business, and others like Christina Properties who just bought it and for a big price tag. So sorry about that. So it just depends, and there's more flexibility based on what they owe on their property, and it varies. I think it just varies from business to business, and always has in Larchmont. I think that the Lipson properties had very fair rents and very under market value rents for a very long time.
So I just want to jump in and make a shameless plug for going to read the Larchmont Buzz today. I wrote a story about the Center for Yoga. I don't know if anyone is on the call. I had seen some names in the registry, but that's an example of a group of people in the community who put together a business plan and found a receptive property owner, in part because they were bringing a business back that had already been there for quite some time. But I think there was another question in the chat about, are the vacant spaces due to rents being unaffordable or a lack of interested businesses? So I'd be curious to get, Bert, you're on the street every day. Is that your sense that, there are people who'd like to come in, and maybe the Center for Yoga was just really kind of unusual because it was a second floor space?
I don't have a sense of that one way or the other. I think it'll be instructive to see how Christina does and where they wind up in defining the market, because of how much they paid and the kind of rent they need to charge. That will be a great indicator of whether there's too much space and insufficient tenants, or too high rent for tenants who can pay it. So I'm kind of eagle-eyed on how they do. I'm hoping they will decide that a hardware store would be perfect to fit into the mix of their new expensive building, but maybe I'm overly optimistic.
There's a question from Randy Skinner. Has a pop-up program ever been attempted? So Randy, if you can unmute and you maybe want to share a little more what you're thinking. Randy Skinner.
Hi, here I am. I live in Wisconsin, in a very tiny town right now. I'm born and raised in Los Angeles, California. Very familiar with Larchmont. My stepmother lives there. My father lived there. They've been there for 40 years. And I'm very involved in the Chamber of Commerce here in Viroqua, and we implemented a pop-up program. So I'm just curious as to, I understand the rents are high and all of that, but I didn't realize there were so many vacant spaces on Larchmont currently. So I was just wondering if the Larchmont organization has ever attempted a pop-up program and talk to the landlords to see if they're hurting, if their spaces are empty. Would they be interested in working like we do an application process here? The landlords who are interested in participating give a cut rate on the rent. The pop-ups have 3 months to see if they can work out or not. So, I mean, that might not work on this large scale, but something along those lines. But I guess it depends on why the spaces are vacant.
Randy, are they,
I
aside
can
from
answer
food-
that.
Heather, one second. Aside from food, what kind of pop-ups did you have there?
Oh, gosh, we have some acupuncture, we have retail shops, boutiques, we have beauty salons, dressmaking shops, a martial arts place. It's quite a variety, bookstore.
How long do the pop-ups last, Randy?
The
Like,
pop-up program is basically a 3-month program. And, obviously you can make it whatever you want. It's a 3-month program. Applications are submitted. The Chamber of Commerce goes over and then selects what would be a good mix for the area. So there isn't, a heavy weight on one side or the other. And then they are given a little bit of a break on the rent. And they go for 3 months. It's usually, the applications go out in August and they usually have October, November, December to pop up. And the chamber helps them with staging and whatnot. Again, this is a town of 4,000 people, so vastly different than Larchmont, obviously, but same small town sort of vibe and aesthetic and ethics. So I was just.
sounds like the type of thing that a bid or a boulevard association, if it was something they wanted to adopt and they had the resources, could probably manage something like that and make it happen.
We have that. That the Optimist that was in the picket fences spaces for the last couple months. I think that went for about exactly 3 months as a pop-up. And I believe that there's one there now in one of the newly kind of redone spaces by Vernetti, the old bank spaces.
Yeah, it's a t-shirt shop, I think.
Yeah.
I think it's owned by the landlord though, and there might be some discussion about something coming in, and that might be just a temporary placeholder, but I'm not certain.
Yeah, it's been done before, and it's a great solution when you can't rent the space. But I think that everybody wants to find businesses that will be sustainable and stay in Larchmont for a long time to come, because it's things that the neighborhood wants. But it is a good way to try things out. And I know that Optimist has another place in Culver City, and maybe they were just trying it out on the boulevard, but they didn't stay for whatever reason.
There is a question I know a lot of people are thinking about, which is from Karen Krieger, about queue conditions. We'll be getting to that a little later, so don't worry, that's going to be a big topic.
Thank you.
What about Jen Levin posted? Didn't Fairfax's Renaissance start with pop-ups? You mean the Renaissance?
Jen, you want to unmute and
Yeah, tell us more.
Fairfax, which used to be a typically, Jewish street with Jewish businesses, was sort of withering away and dying. And these young folks came in and they did pop-ups with tennis shoes. And it really, I'm not saying that that's what we would choose, but it really revitalized Fairfax. And now Fairfax is packed and it's really mixed and it's fantastic. You can go to Cantor's, you can wait in line all day for the newest sneakers, you can get prime pizza. And I think that a lot of those businesses, because that street was hurting as well, really, they did a lot of pop-ups. And I think that, just revitalizing Larchmont, there's, a lot of room for young people to come in, and I don't know. So I'm just saying yay to the pop-up idea. I think that's awesome.
I think I heard also that Fairfax is the center of skateboard culture.
Yes, but I don't think it always was. It was,
No.
it was where my grandfather bought bagels. So it became that. And I think they just had some pop-ups that were really successful.
Yeah, interesting.
Are there other ideas about sort of either fostering or supporting local business that anybody wanted to sort of push or suggest that we think about? Because we've got 4 subjects. We've been on this one for 10 or plus minutes now. Maybe we should talk a little bit about, since somebody asked the question about the queue conditions, we don't have to go in that order. And it seems that that might be something to talk about a little bit, because we did want to talk about flexibility in relation to land use regulations, whether people had ideas about how we could regulate the land better, or no regulation, or more regulation, or what are the things that folks are thinking about. So I noticed that there was that question, which is, it says, are the Q conditions specifying use as a benefit for Larchmont or a hindrance? I think it's a great question. Does anybody have any thoughts about that, as there being a benefit or a hindrance, or have a question about it specifically?
John,
you first-
I think to answer that, you should first define the word Larchmont.
Well, that's a very good point, John. I think the Q conditions and the D conditions that are there apply to the whole street, but they most specifically apply in all of their glory to the area between First and Beverly. So they don't, some of the regulations with regard to restaurants and financial institutions really are specific to that frontage along between First and Beverly.
John, I wasn't clear. I wasn't talking about the geographic area of Larchmont. I was talking about, what does Larchmont mean? Because I would suggest that Larchmont means the 24 people who own buildings, the potentially 75 tenants, merchants, and then all of the customers, and then all of the neighbors. So I think implied in that nice person's question was, as to benefit Larchmont, which Larchmont is?
And that's absolutely right. We're here to have a community conversation in the broadest sense.
Also, John, Jennifer Levin has asked a question, and I'm assuming she's not alone because she wasn't here for the first two. She was
Okay.
doing other community things. She asked what the Q conditions are. Is there a quick explanation of what it covers, what it doesn't? I know it's a hard one.
Well, I don't know that it's quick, but I think that we went through this on our first meeting, but we knew that people would come in at various meetings and jump in or out. So it's a completely fair question. And I think the easiest way to describe it is that people have been involved in this community, including John Wellborn, who was one of the authors of the original Q conditions and the subsequent variations of them. He's rolling his eyes a little bit, but basically people have been concerned about Larchmont and making sure there was a good local mix of retail for a long time. And depending upon which decade you were in, there were different types of pressures on the street. And I think there was a responsive community response to those. So started off with some concerns about too many financial institutions, banks, real estate offices, et cetera. There were conversations about concern of loss of local businesses like hardware stores and other type candy shops and things like that. And so at a certain point in time, there was a fear that the street would turn into a food court. So there were some regulations placed on the maximum amount of frontage of restaurants and the number of restaurants. That was then amended to basically make a distinction between takeout food services versus sit-down restaurants. And all of these things have continuously been discussed and debated and sometimes enforced. And there were some heady actions not so long ago where certain people basically thought that one of the restaurants shouldn't be there, and they worked very hard to see that restaurant go away because it wasn't in keeping with the regulations. So I think the easiest way to put it at this point in time is that between First and Beverly, the regulations are set up so that they basically limit the number of sit-down restaurants, depending upon how you count it, to between 5 and 10. And they do not really limit the number of takeout establishments. And that since COVID, those lines have blurred a lot more, because with the city's implementation of the emergency ordinance, which allowed for the parklets, a lot of the folks that were basically under the rubric of takeout have been able to successfully establish tables, which have saved their business. And at the same time, we're in a position right now where I think there's some questions about what's the future of those to benefit to the street and the community. And I think we'd be very curious as to what the different opinions are about that, or if people have ideas about reforming them, keeping them just the way they are, not having them. I think that the four of us at least entered into this conversation, if not agnostic, open to wanting to hear lots of different ideas.
John, could I suggest that Patty, who has, I think, access to that link, put it in chat, because what you gave was an interesting but not really accurate description of an ordinance. The ordinance itself is simple. It's only about 2.5 pages or even 2 pages long. And if the link is there, people can go read it, because it actually came into existence because the law changed in the city in the late 80s. And there's something called the general plan that sets generalized land uses. And Larchmont, like everywhere else, also had specific land uses. And when the law was changed, they then got out of whack. And so there was a city effort to go and make the uses, the allowable uses, that's whether it's a bakery or a bookstore or a furniture store or whatever, consistent with the general plan. And so that was a big part of the queue condition. And that goes all the way from Melrose to First Street. And then your description of the other aspects between Beverly and First, dealing with the financial services and the restaurants, also came in. But it's a easy ordinance to look at, and it has a map. And Patty, somewhere, I think it's on that I Love Larchmont site.
It's in the chat. I'm just posting it. 3 different ways to look at it.
Cool. All right. Thank you.
So a lot of these topics obviously cross back and forth. So I know people have been talking about this as well. Kathy Roberts, you want to read your question or just ask it and bring it up and tell us what you think?
Well, it's not really a question. It's just, I think that the parklets, outdoor dining areas really enliven the street and make it much more interesting. One of the things I love about going to European cities is sitting outside and watching people go by and chatting with strangers. And I think that's something that just would fit perfectly on Larchmont.
Is there anyone who would disagree with that here? Raise your hand. Jump on. We know there are some people, we've gotten some messages from some people who feel it's dangerous, that we've got some text that if their car is going by, that it puts people at risk. Other people felt that the outdoor parklets, if we're taking up too many spots, we're taking up spots for the businesses that are not serving food. So that's my question for Bert. Bert, as a non-food serving store owner, are you okay with parklets taking spots which might be book buying public?
Yeah, so we've talked about this a bit, and frankly, I've looked to Steve Cohn to get a sense of what's important to him. We like the idea of outdoor dining. We like the idea of the energy, in response, I think, in part to Steve's recent success. We've tried to keep the store open an extra hour on the weekends, hoping that people, while waiting for pizza, would come by. And our manager, Katie Orphan, who ran the downtown last bookstore, has seen studies which suggest that the return on eliminating parking spaces and adding kind of outdoor space is significantly meaningful. And but we will take a cue from our closest restaurant neighbors, the Greek and the pizza place, Larchmont Pizza, because we see us, as I said before, rolling this together. But left to our own devices, more outdoor dining, more people wandering around, and lots of people waiting with a half hour to kill right by the bookstore.
That's
Right
such a
now,
great point.
right now we have, I think officially 10 to 12 restaurants, depending on definitions. And there are a number of basically takeouts who have their own outdoor dining as well. And at some point, we as a neighborhood have to resolve that and make a clear definition of what is a restaurant, and who gets that outdoor dining. So
Well, I think one of the other things we've been sort of encouraged to think about is that not every single parklet needs to be for dining. Like,
Or maybe not all the time, since some people are not serving lunch, and if there's a way to make those more flexible.
but like, for instance, if Bert wanted to hold an event in the parklet, is there a mechanism in a way that it can be done without harming Steve's business or the Greek's business? And how do you, I mean, there's one thing to be say that you have cooperation, but then how do you design those parklets to be flexible, both in terms of design as well as use? So that is something that has to at some point be thought about, perhaps.
Should I jump in?
Sure.
Hi, everybody. I am Steve at Village Pizzeria. I thank my colleagues and neighbors for my shout outs and my comments and feedback. I have been here 25 years. And if anybody remembers the great Renee Weitzer from Councilman Ferraro's tenure, I had a battle with Renee Weitzer over the queue, and I lived to get through it. My new neighbor at Chevalier's are incredibly wonderful people. We're so happy to have them there. And yes, I've asked them to stay open, and will you please stay open later? You know, it's a mixed bag, and I have to be very careful. Bert and I share the same landlord, and he may have a spy on this very Zoom. So we have to be very careful. I will honestly say that in my 25 years, the rent has gone up significantly. Revenue has not matched the increases over the years. There is an issue with the queue and understanding the queue. We had an 8-year battle with one of our alleged fooderies, and we all know what happened there. There are others on the street that are not in compliance. And I've talked to Heather and I've talked to Patty, and most of you know me. Most of you are my customers and friends. You know, the important issues are an equal and fair playing field. And there are a revocable seat permit. If we talk about pre-COVID, a lot of you might not know what the demands and the expectations and the requirements are. There are revocable seat permits where we have to pay for seats outside. There are issues that either are sidetracked in the quote unquote to-go status of a restaurant, or a to-go is it to-go a restaurant? You know, and then we jump to al fresco. If you're a restaurant and have the opportunity to get the al fresco, it seems fresco did not align itself with who was a restaurant and who was a foodery, if we identify foodery as to go. I can't be the judge, and certainly I don't want to make any sort of flack or negativity for the pro and the con. I want everybody to do well. I want there to be an equal and fair playing field. I want us all to have to go through the permit process, the allowances, beer and wine, CUP. Gary, I have my CUP. I have 10 o'clock Monday through Thursday, Friday, Monday through and Sunday, and Friday and Saturday I have till 10:30. Just re-up my CU and all in compliance. But the issues of rent, you know, for those of us here a very long time, rent goes up approximately 3% a year. And then when we go through our 5-year options, if some of you don't know, we then deal with the estimate of what the highs and lows are to in a basic lease or a shopping center lease. Is that's how it's ended, or that's how it's judged on what the average rental rate is from the highs and the lows. So Christina Group comes in, or Mizrahi Group comes in and buys up a lot of properties. Certainly the purchase price goes up, the mortgage goes up, and then the debt service goes up. So then, of course, the rents go up. There's no mystery in that for property owners. However, there is a cap to what Ms. Vernetti said, to what revenue is based on our operations. Can't raise my prices every day. If my pork and my beef and my chicken and my cheese go up, I'd need a board with an eraser to change my prices every day. And then the customer would have something to. Now we're dealing with Postmate, Grubhub, DoorDash, which brings extra business, but some of you might not know we have to go up to 25 to 30%. And then we have to deal with the fallout of the driver not getting the food there, the driver eating the food on the way, and the customer complains to us that they didn't get their food. it's a Postmate issue. It's a Grubhub issue. It's not our issue. We packaged the food. We sent the food out. We don't know how many more deliveries that driver wants to make on the way to your home, which gets your food cold. It's not my fault. So there's so many things that the consumer might not be aware of. And live through the queue conditions specifically, certainly in one breath, I would want to limit, because we went through the gauntlet. We made it through the gauntlet. Things have increased over the years. And certainly our operations costs, our payroll, minimum wage has gone up. Are we going to pass on all the increases to the customer? Minimum wage goes up. Do we pass on the cost of a slice of pizza or a pizza pie or a book at the bookstore? So, economics and the food chain and everything that we're dealing with is a whole part of formula. So there really isn't any one answer. There have been pop-ups on the street. Certainly a pop-up that would succeed would want to stay, but if the rent was too high, based on his revenue, his cost to operate, it might not be something that would be sustainable. So ongoing question, but I go back to an equal and fair playing field. It has to really be a part of the same allowances and the same permits, the same restrictions, and the enforcement from the city has also got to be something that is equal and fair. My issues, sidebar, if and then I'll defer to the next, is the cleanliness of our street. I think we need more dumpsters and garbage cans, and we need more personal pride of each individual ownership, not only the ownership, because the owners are off premise, but I believe we need to have management and an employee responsibility, both on the street and in the alley, in the dumpsters. Dumpsters should be locked. They smell. They have open bags. Perhaps homeless come by and open up bags and want to eat. Then we have flies and maggots, and we have smell. Then we have the farmer's market, who is not accountable to their garbage. They use the Vernetti trash. They use the Tu Madre trash. They use the Burger Lunch trash. Heather might remember before COVID, when Councilman Ryu is here, we did a volunteer cleanup of the alley. 3 people showed up. And I was one of them with Ryu. And we got to go back to personal pride. There's got to be an effort of, as we say, 24 landlords and 75 spaces. We might want to have a cleanup of the alley and the cleanup of the street. I sweep the front of my store every day. I think that it would behoove every single owner of every business and every manager and the employees to have that part of their day routine, to sweep the front, sweep the curb, sweep the leaves. John Wilborn would know. We have an issue, and Tom Nisi would know if Tom is present. We have an issue with safety, with curb, with cracks, with the depth of the tree wells, where elderly step into tree wells and fall and break their ankle and then sue me. I got sued from a elderly, and then a night when we had the Taste of Larchmont, one of the leaders of the Larchmont, I will leave his name out so it's not too worse, but he was right there when an elderly fell and cracked her head open, and the sound of the cracking head was heard by everybody around. And so why don't we address some of that?
Well, you're getting into our problem. You're getting into our next topic area, which is perfect, which is improvements.
I know there's a question before that. I was ready to get to that, but I just wanted to ask Steve a question, because we spoke earlier, and I don't think you watched the first 2 Zooms that we had. And there seems to be strong opinions by a lot of people that one way to improve Larchmont in the future would be by adding restaurants and adding some full service restaurants. And if we do that, it might mean adjusting the queue. And I just was curious if you think, if in terms of saving the street, might mean adding restaurants, how are you comfortable with that? And if not, why?
I have both sides of the coin, honestly, Gary. Having been here 25 years and having gone through what I just said, I would then say no. But in surviving of the street, yeah, I'm a survivor of the street, and I want the street to survive. But I think from all of us, from Dimitri at the Greek, I know I speak to Stephen Vernetti all the time. It goes to the point where if restaurants are bringing in the revenue, and the landlord knows that, whether the landlord piece of the register, whether it's a percentage of gross, I think the rent will go up quicker because we survived, because we are allegedly doing better. So then I think that's a double-edged sword, where if they see the restaurant as the ticket for a rental or all over the place, then let's be fair. We have to agree that we would be diluting each of our revenue stream with more choices. I mean, I couldn't see it being any other way.
I'm not a professional.
So it's
Yeah, we
well,
haven't.
I can only tell you from my point of view. If there were 3, 4, 5 pizzerias on the street, then that would be different. If there were 4 or 5 Vernetti's at high Italian, it would dilute and cut in. If there was 6 or 7 taco joints, it would be
Steve, we're actually doing research on that right now in terms of how it would affect it with more, but so we'll get back to you. But John, you want to bring on the next question? Because Steve's a denizen of the street. He's basically covered all our questions in one without breathing, by the way. That was pretty impressive.
But you did wink as you were going through it.
I love my boulevard, as Miss Vernetti said. My 3rd Street. We support almost every charity. We support every firehouse, every policeman. We're doing our very best to survive. Certainly, our government has helped us out. I'll say, in fairness, if our landlord Bert is on, our landlord has helped us a little bit. I have the biggest problem right now is employees, full-time, able, willing, and competent workers wanting to come to work. And I think that the unemployment issue is a problem, keeping people away. And I think that just the overall issues that I am aware of that may not be, by being a member of the California Restaurant Association and the National Restaurant Association, the industry as a whole is suffering brutally.
Right.
For several reasons.
Got it. Okay. Before we go on to the next question, Lorraine Wild had a question about parklets, and some need design. They seem to be designed better and need help, and there's some mess. And Patty, can you tell us about what you posted on Larchmont 2021, the New York Times article, and hopefully convince people to go to Larchmont 2021?
Oh, well, thanks to John, who pointed out a really interesting essay that was written by a former deputy mayor in New York City about the parklets are a really great idea and they were a temporary solution, but the editorial talks about other options for the parklets. And John alluded to that as well. And if you want to read that, you can read it on Larchmont 2021 under the resource section. And we'll keep adding articles to that. And we are also doing some of these stories in the Buzz as well. Well,
I also think Gary mentioned Lorraine Wild, who I know, but you mentioned something about the design of the parklets, Lorraine. Do you want to talk about that at all?
Well, just to say that if you think about, what makes a really good boulevard, I think the design of parklets and the issue of the trees and the sidewalks are all interlinked. I actually am completely agnostic on the issue of what are parklets for. Like maybe there could be places that aren't dedicated to a restaurant, but a place just with benches for people to sit and chat or whatever. Like there could be different uses for them. But it seems to me that there's a kind of design, the street is crying out for an upgraded design that would incorporate the issue of the landscape, the pavement, and the parklets. And it's probably not possible as long as we've got this giant construction project going on, but it seems to me that it's a really imperative thing. And while the trees are a long-term problem, it seems to me that the parklets are the low-hanging fruit, like how to deal with that in terms of thinking through as landscape, not just as, a little parklet with, 4 tables in it. That's all.
I think you've definitely brought us into the improvement part of the conversation. And I think that you mentioned a lot of different things when you did that. Parklets, design of parklets, use of parklets, sidewalks, streets, sidewalks and curbs and trees. So maybe it's a good opportunity for some of the folks who are here tonight to present what they think maybe a bigger group or a neighborhood or a community might think about in terms of improving the street. Are there ideas, or maybe Heather and Gary, I'm not able to follow the chat as well as you probably are, but are there ideas that are emerging or people that want to speak to that?
I know I'm pretty sure, even if I don't see it, that Lindsay Thurman is here. So I know Lindsay would like to comment.
I'd also love to comment when we get a moment, but go Lindsay first.
Okay.
Hi,
Lindsay.
thanks. Yeah, so a bunch of us have been talking for a while about the possibility of having safe bike lanes to get to Larchmont, especially from the neighborhood. So we've talked to some bike design experts, and I'm really obsessed with bikes. I will admit, I co-host a podcast called Bike Talk, which you really don't have to listen to, but so I've talked to a lot of people about bikes over the years. And okay, so if people are interested, I think it'd be great for the businesses. It would free up parking, and I just would love to be able to ride a bike to Larchmont. So if people are interested, we had an idea too of doing like a one-day pop-up with like spray paint that you could just washes off. So people could just get the feel of it on the anniversary. So if people are interested, I would just love to have continue a conversation.
Sure.
Thank you.
Heather, there's a number of questions about trash after Steve made his comments, and you want to share the budget and the bid and how that works?
Sure. And somebody had asked a question about social media. The bid has social media. We have an Instagram and we have a Facebook page, and it was for us and so does the Buzz. And you should follow both of us. I'm not sure if the Chronicle has an Instagram or not. If they do, John, you want to put it in the chat. But it was a great way for us to communicate during COVID with everybody. So please, if you aren't following us, please do, the Buzz and the bid. So trash has been an ongoing issue. It's the biggest part of the bid's budget. It's the majority of the budget. We have the big belly trash cans. They're emptied once a day at 3 a.m. And they've been overflowing. They've been overflowing during COVID. A lot of people, we think, are not wanting to touch them. So we had a lot of issues with masks and gloves and extra trash. So we had thought during COVID that we were going to be able to save money on trash pickup because that there would be less trash generated. It ended up being the opposite. We had to ramp up the trash. So a couple issues. I know that Steve touched on the alley. One of the biggest issues in the alley, as he mentioned, is not locking the trash. So that's one of the things that we need to figure out a way to encourage all the businesses to lock their trash, because what happens is people go in it and it leaves a big mess.
We're also a dumping ground for the community,
right?
And
so
others
block it. Yeah, people come
who
in
might want to just unload their trash.
Exactly. They'll put mattresses.
I had one store owner, I'll leave him nameless for shaming, used my dumpster for a full year and didn't have to pay for sanitation. That's not fair.
Right. So each business, each retailer has to deal with their own alley trash. The bid deals with the trash on the street. So we clean the sidewalks. The trash cans are supposed to be wiped down every day and graffiti removed. We've increased the sidewalk washing to several times a month. We've increased, we've added the wipe down of the trash cans during COVID. We're still having issues with trash overflowing. So for whatever reason, more trash is being generated on the street, and we're trying to get, some businesses generate more trash than others. So for example, the wine and cheese shop always puts out an extra trash can to kind of take care of the extra trash that they generate. Not all businesses do that. So yeah, as does Village Pizza. And so we're trying to, in the last couple months, I've been talking with Steve a lot, and I've been, talking to our, been in constant contact with our trash company. I've been in contact with some of the owners, property owners that are really interested.
You mean the trash mafia?
Yes. Well, because that's something that I should say is that our trash costs have probably tripled in the last couple of years. So it costs more to haul away the trash. And so that has been something that has really impacted our budget. And that is why the majority of our budget goes to trash and street cleaning, sidewalk washing. It's an ongoing thing that we're, like I said, we're working to try to come to solutions. I think that, at the end of the day, I think that we as neighbors and people who use Larchmont have to have some responsibility for keeping it clean and throwing away our trash. Whenever I'm there and I see something on the ground, I pick it up and I throw it away. I think that we have to work closely with the businesses so that they understand that it's their responsibility. And if every business like Village Pizza, like, the wine and cheese, like Vernetti, like so many businesses on Larchmont take ownership of the front of their store and take responsibility for helping us keep it clean, or even letting me know if it's dirty. A lot of times people will send me photos and then I can text them immediately to the trash company to say, get down there and clean this up. Otherwise,
Hey, Heather.
Yeah.
Heather, there are a couple of little comments in here, which I think are very straightforward. The reason you're having to do all of this work is that for the most part, the city only picks up residential trash.
Correct.
Commercial trash and multifamily apartment building trash is the responsibility of the businesses or people who own.
Yeah, and maybe I should back up a little bit, and maybe not everybody understands what a business improvement district is. It's something that was formed several years ago, I believe in the 90s at some point. And it's basically formed because the city can't afford to provide the infrastructure and the services needed to keep the neighborhood clean and safe. So that is basically, why the bid was formed. Well, actually, I should say originally, the truth is the bid was originally formed to try to deal with the broken sidewalks and the trees and the tree roots that were coming out. But as that became more involved, it became something that the bid actually could not be as involved with as they wanted to, because once you touch the sidewalks, you become liable, and the bid has been sued many times. And the problem is, without replacing the trees, and I don't want to get into a tree argument. I just want to say that the ficus trees have very aggressive roots, and so they obviously go under buildings and affect plumbing. But most importantly, what they do is they break up the sidewalks and make them a tripping hazard. And so when people trip and fall, they sue the business improvement district or the property owner or the business owner. And so to replace the sidewalk and replace the trees is an incredible expense. We did it in front of Rite Aid. The property owner incurred the cost. It was about $50,000, and it was a very difficult process, and we didn't have total and complete consensus from everybody, despite a lot of discussion back and forth. But what came of it was a tree was selected by the Windsor Square group, and the 2 trees were planted, and the sidewalk was repaired, and that stretch of sidewalk in front of Rite Aid is now safe, and there are no trips and falls there. But there's a lot of other sidewalk and a lot of other trees that still need to be discussed and figured out.
Heather, there's a question from Ann Loveland. I'll jump to the second half about some businesses generate more trash than others. And
Yeah.
are they apportioned differently? Is Bert paying less than Steve Cohn because he's got books and Steve's got pizza? And
No, how the bid works is that it's basically a tax, and it's assessment on your square footage. And so either business property owners are responsible for that tax. In many cases, they pass that on to the tenants. So it's based on their front footage, how much they pay into the bid.
let me clarify, we get it double dosed because we already also pay a CAM charge, which is a common maintenance. So we get a hit twice for our spot and our local area, our lease itself, as Bert has learned. And then we have to deal with the bid as well. Apropos to the trees, I just want to quickly interject. It's like a science fiction movie, your worst nightmare. My tree to my bathrooms are almost 70 feet. And when we have to do cleanouts every 3 months, and we pull out arm-sized roots out of our toilet because we're jammed up, that's an expense. I can't pass that off to my landlord. So now I have a third expense, my common air, my bid, and my own maintenance and plumbing because of those trees, which I have no control over.
Well, maybe what we ought to do is focus on improvements for just a bit, because obviously there are different types of trees, there are different types of sidewalks, there's the curbs, there's all sorts of things on Larchmont Boulevard. And I noticed that there was an interesting comment in here about valet parking and there have been comments about bike racks, and I noticed Jennifer Barrett said, I was just in London for a while and they have valet parking storefronts for bikes trying to prevent traffic in the city. Would this be a good use of empty space? But I think what's curious about that is just sort of thinking about, are there things that are preventing more people from coming to the street in terms of the way
we
that
have the bike rack by Burger Lounge, really not used. You know, we have that bike rack that was put in. It's not really.
Well, you have a bike rack, that's true. But I'm just wondering if other people have suggestions about more, less, different, about any of these types of things.
Jennifer Levin says very simply, the street needs more benches. And
okay, that's a great comment.
I agree. I agree 100%.
Urban planner, what do you think, John?
What do I think? Well, there's a famous urbanist named William White who basically said, if you want to know where people gather, look for chairs. And there's no doubt at all that, you know, the first rule of making public places is if you want people to sit there, you have to provide them some place to sit. So that's
right. And
now.
And if I may, by having al fresco, I shouldn't have to deal with the backlash for not allowing people to eat ice cream to help themselves in my patio or burger lounge or.
Well, I think that what you're raising, Steve, is the issue that was raised earlier about how do you in the long run manage the parklets, that they've obviously served a benefit to creating the restaurants or letting some of the restaurants or even some of the food services, let's just call them, survive during a very difficult period. But it's kind of the Wild West out there in terms of who gets to use them when, are they maintained well, are they designed well? So those are all important issues, and I've been making Post-it notes here tonight, and I've put those Post-it notes down on my yellow pad about parklets, design of parklets, management of parklets. That those are all things that seem at some point, whether on a Larchmont basis or a citywide basis, they're going to have to be addressed. So, are there other? Here comes Engine Company 29 again. But are there other folks who have ideas like Samantha, who said she agreed with more benches? Or I usually use the parking meters to lock a bike. That's interesting.
I was going to say that there were some suggestions about maybe more temporary closures of the street to encourage maybe like miniature street festivals, like we sometimes see in other cities, or one day, once a month or once a quarter, expanded farmers market on a Sunday that doesn't just live in the city parking lot, but expands out to the street, or some festival-y kinds of things like that. So that's something that people had expressed an interest in as well. That was in the chat. Temporary, a more frequent but temporary closures of the main street.
Does anybody want to comment?
Then you're going to have the homeowners. Then you're going to have the homeowners around the corner and down the street have
I think
issues,
I think some
elongated
of
hours
these,
of parking.
yeah, I think some of these suggestions are coming from the homeowners, but I think that's one of the things that we should definitely, we could definitely look at. And that's kind of the spirit of this, which is all the ideas are on the table. So, yeah.
And that's also a question of how much is too much, right? Because
Right.
people already accept that the street is closed for the Larchmont Family Fair, some of the other events, and yet if it got to be all the time, there was a comment here in the chat about exactly what Steve was talking about, is that at some point it starts to become a burden on maybe neighbors that are nearby, but trying to find that balance is maybe how one looks at that issue.
Oh,
Right.
Laura,
And there's
John,
a-
Laura Putney has an actual suggestion.
Oh, fantastic.
So Laura, you want to talk about your bench idea?
Well, I mean, it was really someone else's idea, but the notion that if we need more benches, maybe this could be something where private families, sponsor a bench and you pay for the bench, you provide the upkeep for the bench, put a little plaque on there, it's in honor of somebody, and we can just use that kind of private funds to help out if there's this need for benches that feels small and handleable.
Great idea.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think somebody did that actually.
I
There's
think
a,
one of the benches
there's one
has a little plaque on it.
Yeah,
in
front of
honor
the-
of two
in front of
dogs,
the-
right?
Yeah, in front of the new dog store.
Right. Well,
Yeah.
it would, yeah, exactly. Near Tail Waggers.
Tag waggers, that's right.
Yeah.
So I also noticed that there's sort of a surprise comment here. Paul Nankerville
Yeah.
has a suggestion if he can share his screen. That sounds like, hopefully it will be a great surprise.
Can you hear me, by the way?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. I'm trying to share video, but I can't do that. But my first question was all the kind of red parking areas that seem to be almost, I want to say, misused. I'm just wondering, I got to imagine that's a lot of things that the city controls, which I realize gets into some weird stuff. But I just walked down the street and took some photos and just wanted to know if this is even, I'll try and show it here, but basically showing here, just like these areas here, like in front of Tail Waggers, right? There's a red area that's kind of dead, or like Steve was saying, the bike zone where there's no one that really parks there, that I really think parklets would be perfect there. And they don't have to look like this, and they don't have to be like that. They could be flat areas that people could, just sit in, or be performance areas.
Or park there by,
or park there
common
by,
area and be multitask.
It doesn't have to be a locked thing. I mean, I keep on going down the street. There's multiple areas along the boulevard where there's red zones that completely take out like 30 feet of space, and I've never understood that. And
well, some of these red zones, like the first one, if you go back to the previous slide, the first one on the upper left is a city requirement because they don't want cars backing into the crosswalks.
Okay.
The second one is basically an area that was set aside for the bike station, which somebody pointed out is not maintained well. But in both cases, a sort of standard street design program would see those as opportunity sites to basically, in some way, occupy. So you're exactly right, Paul. There are opportunities up and down the street for what's either called bulbing out or, making further improvements. And there are opportunities to manage the red curbs to create different types of spaces and opportunities. So those are very good observations, and I really appreciate your taking those photos and sharing them with us.
The two people you had, I just watched back both, or watched them when they happened, or afterwards reposted the videos. And the second discussion about placemaking, I think that really when you do have communal areas, it completely changes that street. I mean, I grew up in Hancock Park, and now I live on Gower and Beverly, and I walk the street every day. And I just think that when you have areas people can gather, and play music, park their bike, have, talks. I just think it completely changes what's possible there. And I thought those two people in the placemaking thing made a lot of really good points about that. So anyways.
Great. Did you have one? You want to just go to the next?
Oh, yeah.
You had?
This kind of is something else, but I always thought too that if there was either on the south side of the boulevard or on the north side, if there was like a Larchmont version of like the or something like
a
that.
gateway in essence, or
Yeah, there was many years ago. I think
Right.
there's some, John, are there some restrictions in the city that prevent those from going?
No,
across?
well, the only real restriction is that they have to be 14 and a half feet high so that engine company 29 can get under them.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I just think like these last two things that I put up are just, I think that having places that, I mean, whether you like it or not, having photographic places that, people, come to Larchmont to, not only experience it, but take photos of the boulevard. I mean, I also put something here about like, there's a lot of empty wall space on the north side and the south side of the boulevard. And like,
right.
Having these kind of, I know I'm speaking my age here, but these Instagrammable moments where people can take a photo instead of like, welcome to Larchmont Village, whether it be, and I realize that, one's Coldwell Banker and one's Bank of America, but if you maybe work with the business to like have a muralist come in and like have that so that it not only is it a welcoming point, but it also is a place where people take photos. And then, like I said, that also brings people into the community. And I think those things, would really kind of help things out.
We actually proposed an idea on when the city was doing its biodiversity challenge. We proposed a beautiful mural that people could see the value of urban biodiversity for just that lower site that you were looking at. It was, maybe it was a bridge too far for the property owner, but we were.
But muraling is a strategy and a tactic that a lot of community business districts have adopted over the years to both beautify in a way that's very cost effective and also to create visual interest. So again,
and it also becomes a highlight for local painters and local artists to maybe show their work.
You can
And
support
it can be rotated throughout the year. They submit it to a board of approval and they know what their work is. And then they get a chance to show their work in a community-based environment, publicly seen rather than closed in a gallery. I want to interject one quick statement. Earlier on, we talked about, some of you may not know, but Larchmont is featured in a Japanese magazine of which we were a highlight some years ago, and also in Delta Airlines in their book. Larchmont was featured some years ago as a destination for visitors to Los Angeles.
Cool.
For the record.
John, can we go back for a little, even though we're jumping from topics, because I'm reading all the comments and something wasn't covered. And I know Steve Cohn mentioned it about parking, and Kathy Roberts had a comment which we jumped over about if people that live on adjacent streets would probably object if we start closing the street. And and my question really is, how terrible is it if there is traffic, if it's on a street one day or 2 days or one day a month in exchange for a vibrant Larchmont? So
Gary, this is
an
old issue. I apologize, but we have 1 hour and 2 hour limits on some of the streets. So that's a whole separate issue of enforcement and tickets,
which we might be able to adjust with the city if we try and turn Larchmont into a mall, every Sunday or once a month or whatever. And we do have to deal with parking, because we were getting a lot of comments from people about worrying about what are the people right behind Larchmont going to think, and I'm just wondering, as a general conversation, that if people are touching a business, you've got a business right behind you, it's sort of part of the compromise of saying, okay, I can walk to Larchmont, I can get my coffee, I can get my paper, and maybe it's going to be crowded once a month, or maybe it'll be noisy once a month. So I don't know.
But they'll say also, when my friends come over to visit me, they have no place to park. So I've had that many times where my employees have been yelled at for parking, and where's the employee going to park when they have a 2 hour limit to work a whole shift. They can't keep going out every 2 hours to move their car. And so that in itself is an issue just from.
Well, that's certainly, that's certainly the constraint, though it's interesting that I see that Sean Neefsey has said he lives right behind Larchmont on Gower and would not complain, would much prefer a vibrant Larchmont. So like all these things, I think there are competing interests and values, and how do you strike that balance? I mean, I think one of the things that's interesting, a lot of the things we're talking about are management issues. We were talking about improvement issues, which might be capital intensive, but how you manage the parking and make sure it works to the benefit of everybody, whether it be right on the street or the next street or the next street beyond that, is also obviously an issue.
Hey, John Kaliski and Gary Gilbert makes some really good points. And I think this discussion about the adjacent streets kind of ties into what I think I saw on your agenda about next steps. And I think it would be a really good idea, and I believe this was the plan, and probably is the plan, to incorporate some of the people from the Larchmont Village Neighborhood Association. I know Gary has some colleagues, one of whom lives on Beechwood, Windsor Square Board, to actually sit down with you four.
Well, that is the next step, and we are going to get to that. So I know we want to have a hard stop at 9 that we want to do. So we do need to get to that, and we will get to that because that is critical, John. But I noticed that just so that we don't lose the thread of the conversation, which is right now about improvements, but I think there was one more subject. I just want to make sure. Yeah, North Larchmont. I want to just throw that out. But I also noticed that my dog is starting to bark here. I don't know why. But I also wanted to, I see that Randy Rose has their hand up as well. And I don't know whether I can see it on my screen.
It's Chris Rose.
Okay.
My wife and I, we both live on Lucerne, and we agree that anything to make the business district more viable, wherefore hopefully the police would just be available, because one of the things that's happened during COVID, and this has nothing to do with this, but it would get worse, is that people are chugging down both Beechwood and Larchmont at 45 and 50 miles an hour, and that's just dangerous. But the main thrust of it, would we care if there was more traffic down the street? Of course not, as long as it's safe.
I also want to make one general comment that after these meetings, the four of us, Heather, John, Patty, and I, go over the chat again, because we can't cover everything. And there are some comments that are really interesting that we're not ignoring them. We're going to get to them ourselves, and they'll be implemented. So no one's being ignored if your question isn't there. And we are trying to pay attention, but it's really, we jump from subject to subject at times and we miss a little.
Well, we're actually keeping on track here. So I think that's thanks to everybody.
It's super helpful to hear from the people who live right on adjacent streets. I think, let's see, Susan Greenberg had a comment. She's used to crazy parking on Sunday for years, and it doesn't bother me if Larchmont thrives. So that's true.
Well, Ellen Rauschberg says, agree with Sean. We also live on Gower between Beverly and Rosewood, are used to busy parking situation on Sundays and not bothered by it. It brings great livelihood to Larchmont.
Well, that's so great to hear that everybody's got such a wonderful sense of community. And for those of us who would drive or maybe have to walk a little bit further, that's something that we can, think about as well as a way to support our fellow neighbors who are, sharing the streets with us. Maybe.
I also noticed that there was a comment again from Jennifer Levin, who's made a couple of other really great comments about, I'm not sure how it would work, but it's a really interesting idea that the city should have worker parking permits. People should get to park close to their work for free. I do know that our outside experts told us that, or at least Lindsay from National Main Street said that clean and safe parking was one of the 4 ideas that she left us with. And I know that there have been various discussions at times about making the garage under the underground garage, making it more amenable, which I know there have been some efforts to do that recently, but
Right. Improve the signage and make it, maybe
improve the
maybe
lighting,
people
improve the
aren't
signage even
as
more.
aware that it's there. It's pretty reasonable to park there.
Yeah.
Okay.
So do we want to, are there any ideas about North Larchmont, since we said we would cover that? And, if anybody wanted to bring anything up about that before we push into the next steps, which John Welborn was encouraging us to do, because it is important that we describe this process.
John, I can speak to North Larchmont. I'm sitting there right now at Clinton and Larchmont. And I know Patty, Carol, and I have discussed this. An interesting feature about the zoning that's in effect is that when it was put into effect to correct those use problems, the problems with what's an allowable use, that applies between Melrose and First Street. The restrictions that seem to get most landlords upset, which are the ones on restaurants, sometime in the old days, financial institutions, those do not apply north of Beverly. So for example, the Polam Federal Credit Union, kitty corner from us, can exist. Cafe Gratitude, right across the street, is a restaurant that can exist. Lemonade can exist. So there are a lot of opportunities. Interestingly, as part of the 100th anniversary, I was looking back at some of early pictures of Larchmont and zoning maps. And when Joseph Labonte created in 1921 the Larchmont Business District, it was only first to Beverly, and everything north of Beverly were homes. And
That's
these
right.
were homes that would advertise they were accessible to the streetcar that went all the way to Melrose. And that zoning was changed probably 50 or 60 years ago. So pretty much anything goes north of Larchmont, north of Beverly, and it's an opportunity for restaurants. Chandara space was available. Somebody wants to open a restaurant there. And it's an opportunity of, there's a building that's got, I think, Usum Plumbing that's going to be one story that's going to be torn down and put a 3-story building with underground parking. I'm not sure if it's residential. Right across the street is the proposed 25-story residential building. So it's pretty much open season north of Beverly right now, in my understanding.
Within the context of the neighborhood serving uses that were overlaid onto the street in 1992.
John,
Well, actually, the ones that were pre-existing, and then were re-legalized in 1992 when they'd been made non-conforming by the
exactly
plan.
Okay.
John Kalitsky, could you speak to this question in the chat about diagonal parking on north of?
Sure. Well, I'm not the expert, but I think that one of the interesting things about Larchmont, first of all, I think John Welborn's comment that the original zoning for the street was residential is a lot of the reason why the pattern to the north of Beverly looks different than the pattern to the south of Beverly to First Street, because it was residential, and in many ways it takes literally 100 or 150 years for that to basically in some way transform. But parallel parking, diagonal parking, there is the opportunity for diagonal parking north of Beverly, but it would be more limited than it would be south of Beverly because you have to maintain the access to the driveways and things like that. So while I don't know of anybody who's actually done a study of the street, at some point, if people wanted to explore options for reconfiguring the street north of Beverly, I suppose that could happen, though even with the medians, it should be able to work because of the fact that the streetcar was there. John,
there actually was an informal study done with, I think it was Labonge's office, and that would involve, and I would throw this out in the suggestion pile, putting up a median, and I think the idea was to put it on the east side of the street to allow a traffic lane with no parking right next to the curb to give total access to all the existing curb cuts and also to serve perhaps as a bicycle lane. this is like K Street in Washington. You have that
Right.
lane. And then you would be able to put 100% angle parking going out to the center of the street because the street is wide enough to do that.
So there are options in terms of exploring how that street could work. And I think, you know, even I know Lindsay came and talked to our smaller group of 4, and I know she's exploring options. And I think that one of the interesting things that Howard Blackson said when he presented was to sort of think about the street as having not necessarily needing to be exactly the same design all the way north and south, that you could make the area to the north of Beverly have one idea, and then between those Beverly and First another, and the trick would be how you tie it all together, but that's certainly possible.
It also fits into the discussion that I know Gary Gilbert has focused on, and that is the expressed desire of the entrepreneurs running the farmers market to be able to have more vendors to serve the demand by having a place to expand. And there have been lots of people looking at it, and there's been no solution. One of the problems, because preventing a solution, is all those curb cuts. So possibly this would have a way to have a really good large area, sort of like the Hollywood Farmers Market, as an expansion space.
Well, you know, it's 8:49, which means we only have about 10 minutes left. So maybe it makes sense to share the screen again and go through the next steps, which were raised, because we're not going to stop here. I do think we don't have a lot of time, but there I've got, let me just do it quickly. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. I collected 14 very specific ideas tonight, and they are really interesting. Everything from lockable dumpsters to taking a look again at the parking north of Larchmont, which we were just talking about. So I'm sure that Patty and Gary and Heather have been taking notes as well, and we intend to use these notes. So let me just go back to trying to share my screen again, which first I have to hit, I guess, no, not.
While you're sharing, I just wanted to tell the people who are still with us that people are asking about grocery stores, and they're asking about, you know, like different kinds of locations. And we will hopefully have a survey at some point. We'll hopefully deal with that specific question of, you know, what do you miss? What would you like? Because that's another longer conversation.
Absolutely. Okay, so let me just share this, and then I will hopefully, what do you see right now? Do you
Click
see?
present. Just click present and you're good to go.
Okay, is it good to go now?
Yes, perfect.
Okay. So John raised the question of what's next and how are we going to do this? And we have been thinking about this. I mean, we're all volunteers. We intend to stay volunteers. I think what our first goal was to have this conversation over the course of 3 evenings, and then to get together and digest those ideas and start to organize those ideas. And I think for at least for the 4 of us, to try to filter them in terms of this short-term, mid-term, and long-term, with our commitment to trying to come up with some actionable items that we can either take to the council office or take to the Greater Wilshire Neighborhood Council or take to the homeowners associations, et cetera. To do that, we really do need support, and we really do need to create a little bit of what I would describe as a little bit more informal, formal structure. So in fact, we are going to sort of reach out and try to get representatives from the various organizations that serve the street and that serve the community and that represent the community. We're not doing this in a scientific way or with an election or anything like that. If people are really super gung-ho to participate, you know, contact Patty and let her know. But we are, the BID, the Greater Wilshire Neighborhood Council, the Larchmont Boulevard Association, the Hancock Park Homeowners Association, the Larchmont Village Neighborhood Association, the Windsor Square Association. Those are the immediate ones that we're very conscious of. And then there are some other groups. We'd love to have some young people participate, because we know that the way young people look at the street is a little bit different than those of us who are not as young look at it. I think the 4 of us, Gary, Patricia, Heather, and myself, are very interested in trying to figure out some short-term things that we can come back to the community and say, between now and the end of the year, here's some things that we want to move forward with, and build some type of working consensus by working with these groups to do that. So it's a little bit amorphous, it's a little bit voluntary, but that's the way it has to be. But we do take all these ideas seriously, and we hope that one of the outcomes of this meeting would be that some of you who have ideas that basically will take more time or are long-term ideas will not be discouraged by how much work that it takes, but will start to organize yourselves, and maybe even within the context of these same organizations to start moving some of these ideas forward. Because when we communicate with each other and we work with each other, we have more chances of success. So that's what our plan is. And with that, I would basically stop the share again and say that we've got a few minutes left before 9 o'clock, and maybe we should just throw it out for anybody who has any last comments or wants to comment or have some suggestions about how we propose to move forward. And right now we don't have any set dates, but I would imagine we'd try to come back in the early fall, maybe with some initial thoughts about actionable items. Does that, Gary, Patty, Heather, did I say that correctly?
You did a great job. I love the comments, and I just wanted to shout out to thanks all of you for your ideas. There was a moment where Gary and I were the only ones on the Zoom, and we thought, what if we're the only ones doing this? So we thank you all for joining us. And I want to just thank Sue Lee, who's here with the council office, for being here tonight. And if anybody missed this, we're going to record it. And Liz Fuller's on, my co-publisher, and she's been taking copious notes, as only Liz can do. So we will definitely have a written and audio record of this. Gary?
Yeah, one thing we didn't talk about was Bert mentioned something when Bert said he was in trouble at Chevalier's, and he put an email out and the community came through. And one of the questions we are going to be addressing at some point is, what is the community willing to do in terms of, on their part, instead of just asking the landlords and asking everyone, are we willing to commit and say, I will join that book club, or I will have my breakfast, I will use Larchmont, and not just kind of say I will, but actually do it. I will buy a book a month to keep that place alive. I will go out to dinner once a month on Larchmont, because if we do all this work and we sort of get what we think the neighbors want and people don't commit to it, like, are you willing to spend $20 on a book if you can buy it on Amazon at 17? And if the answer is not yes, we're going to be in trouble because of our rents, we're going to have some issues. But I think we need to all commit as a community. And it's not going to be easy, and everyone's not going to do it. I know that up front, but we need enough of us to say, this is our street, and we need to just join yoga for a year. We need to just do everything we can to make it work. And it may take a little sacrifice, but we need to do it. That's my
$20 for a book, definitely. $20 for a cup of coffee, I'm not so sure. Okay. Well, I think that we've come to the end of this first session. Stay tuned. We'll try our best to come forward with something that is meaningful.
Yeah, and we'll be sure to send, for all of you who joined the Zoom, I've got your emails. I know a lot of you are Buzz readers, and we'll keep you posted that way. And we'll use our social media and be sure to tag Heather as well. But thank you.
Not me,
all.
tag the bid.
Heather, that's what I mean. Heather,
it's Larchmont Village, our Instagram.
Larchmont Village, and we'll make sure that the word gets out. And if we miss something, be sure to let me know. Thank you all so much, and we'll be in touch soon with some suggestions and some next steps. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Worked out really well. Just like you said, Patty.
Okay.